it was like it was originally just meant to be a project for the centennial, and a lot of people said, oh, you know, nobody's going to come. Who's going to come? And everybody came. And so that was really exciting and gratifying. And that was the beginning of the Powell Street Festival.
はい、右手で鼻をつまんでください。左手で交差して右の耳。はい。交差。交差。交差。
The reason for the very first Powell Street Festival was to bring the community back to this neighborhood because of its historical significance to the community. You know, for 2 or 3 days every year, the community comes back to this park, right? It goes back to the days of pre-war when it was baseball and everything like that.
I was born in Vancouver on the 700 block Georgia East, so I used to come to the Japanese language school here, and I used to hang around Powell Street with my mother when I was a little girl. I can't recall exactly what year I first experienced the Powell Street Festival, but it was fun. I was just overwhelmed because I just took a few steps and then I'd meet somebody I knew, and I'd go another step and see somebody else. So it's like old home.
The community has essentially, abandoned Powell Street for the most part as a place to, go to shop or whatever. But I think it still feels like coming home every year to reclaim the park. And yeah, it's wonderful to see everyone coexisting side by side.
Actually, this goes back to the Oyakawas were West Coast fishermen, like my dad was. This is our fundraiser, right? It's each of the different community groups has their sort of area of expertise, right? All representing different parts of the Japanese Canadian culture. The omanju booths and the yakisoba booths and all of that. This is, I guess, really the West Coast Japanese Canadian fishing community. So, anyways, we're going to pull one off for you. Okay. Ready? Can you hold it like you're holding a golf club? Right? Hold. Point. Okay, right? Point. Show. Okay. Back. Martin.
And so, the whole generation has grown up with the Powell Street Festival. First of all, it's the longest running festival in Vancouver, I think, of its kind, and probably almost in this country in terms of really a community-based festival. It is very, very unique.
There was a period when my family just didn't really want to come to the festival, but I kind of always made them because I really enjoyed it. I would just want to come because it's a neat atmosphere and you get good food. The other thing was that we didn't know a whole lot of people, at least my parents didn't know a whole lot of people in the Japanese Canadian community. My grandparents usually ran into people that they knew from way back from pre-war days or from Slocan or from internment camps or whatever.
It's a piece of my childhood for sure, like to make me aware that I'm not the only one, that's like me here in Vancouver kind of thing.
I've been coming to the festival for 11 years. My dad usually does set up and take down all the time, so I'm there all day most of the time.
I probably first came to Powell Street Festival when I was a really small kid. I was probably about 8 or something like that, right? And I didn't go for a long time, and then I started going probably in my early 20s. When you're a snarky teenager, you just kind of are embarrassed about your roots, and you don't want to have any involvement with your heritage or whatever, because when you're a teenager you want to just be homogenous, and you don't want to be different in any way. You want to be like everybody else, and you just said, I'm Canadian, I'm not Japanese Canadian, I'm not anything different.
I grew up in an internment town where when I was a child I was really discouraged and discriminated against speaking our language, even as much as eating our food and the way we look. So I make a real effort to empower the younger generation to keep that pride within their community, because I have nieces and nephews who are half Japanese and half Hakujin, right? And I try to instill in them, remember your Japanese side too, because they just say, well, I'm Canadian. And when my parents were here, and when we said we were Canadian, everybody said, no, you're not, right? You're Japanese.
When there's a lot of interracial things happening and biracial kids and stuff, Powell Street's the only place where you'll see a lot of people like that, and everyone's really like comfortable. They don't question where you're from, or they don't look at you differently. They just go, oh yeah, that's whoever, and it's just a comfortable environment.
In my view, Hapa is it's a word that I can use. I like the sound of the word. Hapa refers supposedly to, I guess, a mix of Pacific Islander, Asian, and another race. And I think the typical Hapa, definitely in California, is going to be probably Japanese or Chinese, white. That's very typical, but there's many mixes. So last year I presented some illustrations from my storybook Nectarine River, a children's storybook. That's about a mixed race protagonist. And this year I brought the giant skateboard, which is a continuation of a kind of mixed race focused art project.
There's just a real community connection, I feel, at the festival that I work at other festivals. I don't feel that way. I go to other groups and I don't feel that way, But there's a real general, I guess if I would say it's really heartwarming to work at this festival, Yeah, for me.
Yeah, for me the first festival coincided with my introduction into the Japanese Canadian community. I think I was about 18 or 19. It was one of those moments, I guess I wouldn't say an epiphany, but a coming into a realization that there was this unique aspect of myself. So for me, the festival has always had a really important place in my heart as really representing the coalescing of the community. It's the one time of year where people come together.
Powell Street is one of the community festivals or events or groups that evolves with the time. The community is changing, and we have to accept that, in our community there's Hapa people, there's gay people, and there's now you don't just have traditional Japanese music, you have funk or you have hip hop or whatever. And I think that's really good, and that's what I like about Powell Street. It involves everybody, I think.
It's interesting that the Powell Street Festival has continued on every year, and in the last decade there's been a lot of noise and breakthroughs and advancements around things to do with artists of color and identity politics and stuff around sexual orientation, and those are things the Powell Street Festival has always dealt with.
In '79, the San Jose Taiko group came to perform, and a group of us that were coordinators and volunteers of the festival saw them perform and were quite excited and thought, let's start a taiko group. That would be fun.
But San Jose, it was like, for them it was, as it became for Katari Taiko, a way of exploring their roots and their heritage. And they just really looked like they were having a good time. Of course, this is like coming out, this was 1979, coming out of, the burgeoning women's movement, and all the women looked at that and thought, man, that's what we want to do. We would like to be up there at Powell Street Festival showing Asian women as strong.
I don't think there's any real reason that Powell Street has to be equated with hard labor. It's a huge job. Setting up is hard enough, but taking down is really hard. It all happens right after the festival, so everyone's tired from working on the festival. And then you have to load the trucks. That's the final bit in what is a laborious, starts on Thursday with the load up.
See, I don't think people realize how hard it is to put the festival together, and that's because they take it for granted because it's always been around. I think that people, when it was brand new, saw the effort and realized how hard it was because suddenly here was something that never happened before. But when it happens every year, it's amazing, but I think the community can take it for granted. For a lot of people, they don't know a summer without the Powell Street Festival.
It'd be great if the Powell Street Festival can go on for like 25 more years, so it's like we'll celebrate the 50th anniversary. That'd be great. I mean, everyone loves coming here. They come on down on BC Day long weekend and they stay all day Saturday, stay all day Sunday, and they've eaten takoyaki every single day, 4 times a day, and they just love it.
Festival is something very, very visible, tangible. You know, once a year, you can, if you want, you can create a community.
As active and doing things, so I thought I just want to say that it was great to see, like, even though it was like 20 years ago, like some of the same people are still as active and doing things, so I thought was amazing.
It was like looking at old family movies, you know, your old family movies that you see Christmas and all those things, and it's so fun to look at them and see people that, you know, have passed away or just, you know. It really felt like family to me. Yeah.
I thought the film really captured the feeling of the festival. And it was kind of like a slice of the festival at that moment. And you could feel like at 25, something was happening that was actually sort of had its run, in a sense. And what's so astounding is that 20 years later is actually twice as strong, way more impactful in a way, you know, that whatever it was somehow sort of re-energized itself.
And then the comments in the film too, I think they're still relevant today. Like that thread has continued over the years for the most part. So I'm really impressed with how current organizers, how that has still continued to be as part of, you know, building community, but also being open to lots of different perspectives.
Kathy reminded me that at that point when that film was being made, we really reached I think we hit a wall and we were really tired, because I think we were just so tired, right? That people just took us for granted, just never, I think we were running low on energy, people, and it really was, I think, a pivotal point that it was kind of like, well, maybe this isn't going to continue any longer because we're just all really, really tired.
When we were shooting that, we were so tired and we were just like, oh, can we keep this festival going? Did you see those old, you know, wooden booths and the, you know, the kind of setup that we used to do? You know, like it was so much work and everybody was a volunteer. Only the one paid staff shifted it from a community festival to a professional arts And the other thing that also happened was, and that was a little bit before Miko, but like in around 97, when people were saying, you should move the festival out of that neighborhood. That was also a big thing. And we had community meetings about that. And it was really powerful. I remember Rika Morehouse saying, you know, our families, our communities were the ones that used to get talked about so badly. And they were like the people that people describe, you know, low-income people now in this neighborhood. And, you know, we have a moral obligation to stand with them and fight for justice for everybody. And that's why we would stay in this neighborhood, you know, in addition to the fact that it's historical and it means so much, but that we're going to stay. We're not leaving Powell Street. It's Powell Street Festival because the level of ownership people have is really high for the festival, and it needs everybody. It cannot happen without all those volunteers. So
what is so impressive was that change toward professionalism without actually changing the nature of the festival. It didn't become a commercial entity. It didn't become a kind of corporate event. It remained what it was, even while the whole background, as you say, the structure behind it that nobody sees was becoming way more professional. And I think that was huge and very impressive. I think the transition in a generational thing, you know, I am part of now the OGs, or the, you know, way back until I can't even remember how far back that was, but there's like my grandkids are now running the festival in a way, generationally speaking, and that's impressive. That you know, second and third generation of the festival organizers are running it.
Seeing everything in, you know, the takedown of the festival, and that's all volunteer run, right? And it's just so impressive to see where we've come from Lynda when you made this film to now. I didn't see that in terms of like the energy of the festival. I didn't see how tiring, but I did see how much work and how much like reliance we have on the local people that are at the festival. And that was something that like opened my eyes to like, oh wow, the way everybody has come together and the way how everything has grown from that. And really, like you mentioned, like the grassroots nature of the festival. That's really something that was always kind of core to like my time on the board as well. And it was just maintaining that.
What everyone here created was this incredibly welcoming, warm atmosphere where I stepped onto the park grounds and it felt like a homecoming. So even though, yeah, the video feels like home movies to me as well, even though I wasn't part of the festival back then. So it's this amazing creation that's carved out this space for all of us. And for me, that's what I'm continuing to try to make sure is the spirit of the festival and that we have, so that when we do have new volunteers, new staff, new people who just come to the festival, they know this is their place if they want it to be. This is we're all connected, and hopefully they can be part of this family if they choose.
My first festival was 1983. I was in Nanaimo, but I had just come from Winnipeg. It was a real game changer for me, that feeling of being in a real comfortable, welcoming space. It was, and also that kind of kindling of more acceptance and of being Japanese and the Japanese culture, and it felt very familiar because of the way it was put together. The thing that I really enjoyed when I was walking around in those early days was it felt like a real gift to the Issei and the Nisei. You know, people would just be bumping into one another, hadn't seen each other since, pre-war days, even internment camp and all that.
It was such a privilege to speak to everyone that year. I remember it was kind of just luck, but it was the festival was at the language school that year. And so everyone was going through the building, and I had a room there, and I would just grab people and come in and hear all these stories about the origins of the festival.
And they'd see each other after not seeing each other for like 20 years. And it's very heartwarming. And people would, I know back east, they'd plan to come to the coast at Powell Street time because everybody was around.
I think the Powell Street Festival for me was one of the places that I felt the most comfortable being myself. And in saying that and being interviewed by Lynda, I was able to say the word gay, which I probably didn't talk about in the community at all, because I felt very, very alone. And I remember, I have to thank all the people here because I felt that I wasn't actually able to come out and say I'm queer in the community. But when I was at Powell Street, I didn't have to say it. I just felt that I belonged. So
in that period, like 25 years after, I guess it was time out for me. I was dealing with family things and personal things. So I kind of wasn't there for those years in between. But now that I've come back to it, it's so exciting because it's still the energy is there, and it's still a place where people come together. And like Les, you say, all the, old folks who we are now, we all can gather together and when we haven't seen each other for decades, or it's a very special place. Thank you.
I remember the first time I went to the Powell Street Festival, I was just amazed. When I saw Powell Street Festival, it just really made me very excited, and couldn't believe that something like that was happening here in Vancouver.
I guess just around the talk about the changes around the 25th anniversary and or before that, and that time where we were talking about the location and what was going to happen, and actually was on the board when we had to vote about that, which was, I was gratified to be able to have a say in that. That was when the advocacy committee was born, actually. So it's been around for 20 years.
When people talk about it feels like a sense of coming home, I think that's so true for every generation. And I think that's the Powell Street Festival is so special because it allows you to celebrate things that you might not have thought you were able to celebrate in other spaces, as well as things that allow you to connect with others in a very special way. So
the social justice component was always an integral part of the identity of Powell Street Festival. So when I joined as volunteer and as board member, it's been a part of the festival that's so important. The amazing thing about the festival to me is that it has so many different identities. It represents and advocates for the current residents of the neighborhood. It's historic about the Japanese-Canadian history of internment. It points towards the future by working towards reconciliation with the First Nations people on whose land the festival occurs. We work together with other racialized groups, and towards the Japanese Canadian community, we also advocate for them, for new immigrants or new people to the community as well. So advocacy and outreach encompasses so much that we do. We're at this unique position where we can bridge all these different communities and try to bring them closer through our use of arts and culture. How do we do a festival that brings so many people into the neighborhood for a weekend while remaining respectful of the people and the current residents? How do we make sure that it's not disruptive in a damaging way? And how do we try to be better neighbors, allies, and a part of this community? So that's really at the heart of what the Powell Street Festival is moving forward. And these are foundations which because you've made sure we're part of the identity when it was started. We're continuing with that and trying to constantly grapple and live towards that example.
I think that there's this feeling of like that, what you're talking about, Eddie, about like being respectful or just that whole thing, I think is really felt, like even with anybody who happens to come and then they want to come back next year and things like that.
The festival has thrived because a lot of the Asian Canadian queer community, we have so many folks who have been supporters, who have been coordinators, who have been, volunteer some of the coordinators for the different areas and really and supporters, and that they come, and it was a big choice they had to make when Pride did move to the weekend. So it's just been an integral part of the festival always, before I got there and then when I got there. So
Powell Street still had a very kind of grassroots activist feeling. And the first time I went to Powell Street, I was blown away because I thought it was going to be one of those, multicultural, get some, ethnic food. And it was so not that. And I just remember thinking, I belong here. Like there were so many queers and happas running the place and running around. And I just thought this festival is unique, like really special. And I think it's that diversity and edginess of the festival that maybe keeps it going.
I truly believe that it was initiated by that combination of new immigrants and Sansei for different reasons. The Sansei, as you say, Connie, were in many ways politically motivated and sort of trying to find their home. So I felt like that initial thrust was, it was hard because many in the community were not convinced that it was going to be successful or that it was going to be useful. At the time we were doing it, it had its own urgency, but nobody was thinking that 45 years later, this festival was going to be there. And nobody was thinking that people at universities were going to be writing papers and dissertations on this event. And nobody was going to understand. Nobody could even imagine, none of us actually, I feel like, could even imagine that the Powell Street Festival was going to be kind of a visionary kind of event, because we were just sort of fighting all the battles to get it done. The whole thrust of that advocacy now is so exciting because the festival was born out of advocacy, in a sense. It was born out of people who wanted to find their own identity, find their own sense of home. And back then, that was a political statement.
The pattern that I see is that Powell Street Festival, Yonsei might come from across the country for their new careers or whatever, and they'll turn to Powell Street Festival because they have an ancestral root in the neighborhood, possibly. Or they'll come because they've been trying to find a way to get their hooks into their Japanese Canadian identity. And for some, they arrive at Powell Street and it can embrace the complexity of who they are, Hapa from different parts of the country or post-war immigrant, whatever it is, because everything that you've all articulated, that pattern continues. And what keeps people, I think, is that social justice.
Now we're working with grassroots frontline organizations that, support people who are unhoused and precariously housed, that are, doing harm reduction and fighting overdoses and working on food sovereignty and food security and collaborating so we can hire folks from the neighborhood and really digging deeper into how Powell Street Festival can have a role in social justice and improvements in the neighborhood for the people that are there now and not displace them. So I think all of these ideas they've been growing over the years and they are continuing to grow. And as people join in, and it's exciting that actually a lot of Japanese Canadians think that that's a worthwhile endeavor and they feel connected to that idea. Like that makes sense to me, that our families, our were treated horribly, and we understand then what that means. Injustice means
being 3 generations in the festival. I've kind of always been connected to the festival in various ways on the board and doing publicity and blah blah. And then my husband and daughter did the environment, and they used to go around and pick up garbage and do this and that. And I was coordinating the sales booth. And at a certain point, I didn't want to do it anymore. And Nico said, "Oh, I'll do it. I'll take it over." And I remember being really surprised because although in high school she was involved in the environment and she was very strong about women's things, although she volunteered every year for the festival, she never really talked about being Japanese. And so I thought, oh, she wants to take on more responsibility. Yay. And then, to my amazement, she wanted to coordinate. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I don't know what I've done right. And maybe I've done nothing, but there she is coordinating the festival. And now she is organizing the sales booth with Nina, and Saya helps. And I've been told that she's a very good salesperson and she can deliver the correct order and give you the correct change. So I'm feeling quite happy that it does seem to continue through, like family continues. And even though you don't talk it up and you don't say anything, the festival, I think, has this lure. And so I'm really happy and that it existed. It was my way. It was the only people I knew before I came to Vancouver who were of Japanese descent were my family. And so when I got involved with the photo project, which was a centennial project like the festival, all of these Japanese Canadians automatically became my family. And that's how I felt about them. And then with the festival, my family grew so large, and it was just, it was great. It was, I've never had that feeling before of being in such a large family as a single child. And so it was great. It was wonderful. The festival has been a marvel for me.
I wasn't at the first festival, but I was at the second one, and basically that coincided with me discovering that I was in fact Japanese Canadian and what it meant to be a sansei, and you know that, and I did sort of in this 1 year develop this massive extended family. And so as I said in the movie, that the festival's been really important to me. But now our older daughter Emiko is on the outreach and advocacy committee, and so it's been really great. You know, one of the bittersweet things about COVID is that Emiko's been living with us while she attends the University of Toronto, because there was no point in her going to Toronto while things are so bad there. So she's been living here for the last year and doing her work with Powell Street. And it's been really cool in that I've been sort of teaching her about the history of our community as much as I know it, not that I'm an expert. And she's been teaching me a lot of things about advocacy and social justice and trying to make me a little bit more woke. So I think it's been a symbiotic relationship, I think, and really fantastic to see her part of that generation of Japanese Canadians who are looking beyond our community and seeing our place in the greater community, in the greater world. Yeah, so that's been sort of echoing what Lynda said about sort of that feeling of pride when your kid sort of you know, I don't think any of us ever pushed them either. We just sort of, you know, we took them to the festival every year, and they, you know, picked out the water balloons and they ate the kakigori, and now they're, you know, they've somehow woven themselves into the fabric of the festival. So that's been really, really fantastic to see.